order the special session of the Scottsdale Unified School District Governing Board, February 26th, and the time is 6 p.m. I'd like to actually ask Vice President Lindsay to lead us into the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We're going to have a roll call from the far left.
Amy Carney,
Karen Warner,
Julie Sanowski,
Zach Lindsay.
And Libby Hart-Wells. We have a quorum. I am going to turn it over to Dr. Menzel to take us through introductions.
Please.
Thank you all for coming this evening to a board retreat. Year 2 for our 2 new governing board members, but the first time we've been able to have this type of session. And we asked Dr. Tim Ogle and Julie Bacon to facilitate the session. They both have extensive experience in working with school boards. Julie, well known in the Valley, not only for her work with ASBA, but also for her long tenure on the Paradise Valley Board of Education. Dr. Ogle, both a superintendent and former head of ASBA, has done a lot of the workshops with governing boards, and so we feel like we're in good hands this evening to kind of talk about how we can work together to serve the needs of kids in Scottsdale Unified School District. And with that, unless there's anything else you want me to say, he graduated from Indiana. I'm not holding that against him.
It's not our basketball year, but we shall come back.
One day.
We'll be better, I promise.
Well, thank you all for having us here. One of the things that I have loved about being an education advocate in Arizona is doing this, being at schools in your communities and working with boards in where you live, because that's how you learn about, the culture and the things that are happening at the schools, and great things are happening at every school across America, and I need to celebrate that. So thank you. It's an honor and a privilege to be here. A number of weeks ago, Tim and I were somewhere, and he introduced me by saying that I have decades of experience in public education in Arizona, and I was like, really? Decades? You had to point that out, didn't you? But I'm gonna pay him back right now and say he has more decades than I.
As the senior member in the room, I'm proud of that. And yes, I've been working with boards since the mid '80s, on boards or with boards. And either as an employee or a consultant or a presenter, I've retired a couple of times, and last May, Dr. Ty from the Arizona School Administrators Association called me and said, can you come and help us? We have a lot of folks asking for different kinds of support, and so I said, sure. After 10,000 rounds of golf and a torn rotator cuff, I decided to come back and try to be helpful. Again,
it's a mean game of golf.
And
it wasn't that good.
And it wasn't. I was average, and then I got old and hurt. So, but nonetheless, my orthopedic guy corrected my slice. He took 2 degrees to the left, and now my slice is better. So that's a joke. But nonetheless, thank you for having us. We're honored to be here, and over the next couple hours, we hope to talk about what we know is best practice from being involved with hundreds of districts, literally in every county and town in this state. Julie and I have worked together in a variety of capacities for 10 years and doing this kind of work. So we're happy to be here tonight. We intend this to be conversational. And with that being said, we'll get started.
Yeah, and I always like to remind everyone that it's your retreat. It's not mine. So when you need to talk about things, when you want to discuss things, if there's something you have a question about, just jump in, because we want this to be informal and conversational and most of all helpful to you and to the district. So it's very disconcerting to not be able to see that when I click it, but I'm going to believe that it is on the let's get started slide. So what we'd love to do is just hear a little bit more about all of you. So your name, number of years of board service or as an educational professional or working in education, and then why did you run to be on the board in Scottsdale? And I will it's first come, first serve. I always tell people I'm a mother, so I can wait forever for someone to answer me.
I'll start.
Okay, great.
Libby Hartwells, and I have been on the board this is my 4th year, starting my 4th year. And my educational background is mostly spent my career in higher education, but I also taught at the community college here in Maricopa County for about 5 years, and currently back into technology transfer at Johns Hopkins University, and heavily STEM, which is a nice segue into why I ran.
Okay.
And that was science literacy to bolster science literacy.
Okay.
After having been a judge at the International Science and Engineering Fair, and observing some differentials that I thought were disconcerting to me as a scientist. So that has been and continues to be my motivation.
It's your passion.
Yeah, for students, right?
Yeah.
For their future.
Mhm.
Yeah.
For their future.
Okay.
Thanks.
Zach Lindsay, 4th year on the board, and I ran because I was helping out so much at my daughter's school that I figured that I would do it at the district level.
That's great. So you went from one volunteer job to another really big volunteer
To the
job.
big job. All right.
The pay, it was the pay.
Yeah.
Great.
Well, since we started this pattern, I may as well continue with it. My name is Julie Sanowski, and this is my 4th year on the Scottsdale School Board. I started as a career educator back in 1986, so most of my teaching experience and leadership roles have been at the middle schools. And I ran because I was trying to correct some bad scenarios in our Scottsdale School District that I was a part of as the SEA leader in our district, and I saw how the impact on our employees impacts our students. And so that's why I ran.
My name is Karen Werner, and I've just completed my 1st year on the board. And I spent 22 years as a parent in education, very actively engaged and involved. I talked to my kids every night and reviewed their work and participated in fundraisers and everything that I could get my hands on. I was also, I spearheaded, and I don't know you guys on the board, the campaign to get sports started in 2020 for our athletes and fine arts programs back, I believe it was May of 2020, and that kind of thrust me into seeing what was going on in our schools, and just became very active and thought, I need to get involved. There was a lot of broken trust and lack of transparency at the time, and so it really gave me inspiration and motivation to run, and I'm a staunch advocate for students, parents, and staff, and really just want to do what's in the best interest of them.
Great. Thank you.
I'm Amy Carney, and I also was elected in November of 2022. And I'm a mom of 6, all educated in the district, starting right here. And I ran because I had not been paying attention. I could have told you nothing about school board before 2020. I have triplets that graduated at 2020, so obviously I had a high interest and a daughter in 2021 on what was going on. And I say, I was looking for someone to run, and everyone turned the finger at me. I'm a writer in the parent and family space here locally and nationally, and so I'm an advocate for children, for family, for parents, for teachers, and I have a lot of good relationships in the community. So I said, okay, in my spare time, I will run for school board, and it's a privilege to be here.
Yes. Thank you. Hey, Glass, you're gonna have to tell us about yourself.
Oh gosh, me too.
I mean, you're part of the team.
Yeah, look,
Well,
you're at the table.
Gladys Wagner, I'm board secretary and also the executive administrative coordinator of the superintendent and the governing board. And I've been with the district since 2020. It's not super long. Moved from Oregon, but originally was from Arizona.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
Well, Nick Buzan, I know both of you.
In 2004, I was forced to declare a major after years of not knowing what major I wanted other than liking to study history. I worked at a summer program in which I was able to engage with secondary-aged at-risk students up in Flagstaff, and I said I want to get a teaching certificate and teach social studies, and I did that for a couple of years. Always wanted to go to law school, and tried to figure out a way to marry the two subject matters. Looked up all the people in education law in Arizona at the time, and somehow found my way to ASBA back in 2013. Did 1 year of that, and somehow found my way back to it, but always had a inkling that I would somehow find my way back to education after being a prosecutor for several years. So happy to be back and enjoy doing this work.
So this is my 22nd year as a superintendent, 4th in Scottsdale, 30th in public education and/or education support areas. So I'm not nearly as old as Tim.
Exactly.
But I'm working on getting there.
Exactly. It's a good gig. Maybe.
So yeah, that's and you know, my why is because kids, and I really wanted to meet in this library because I think this one really captures the heart of what we do in a unique way, and I think that's what's really important is for us to center the students in our conversations, the decisions we make, and how we think about where we're going as a district.
Well, there's obviously a theme here, right? You all are serving because you want students to have better experiences, more successful outcomes, and achieve as much as they possibly can. So, what I think is so great is that everyone here understands the relationship between the board, the superintendent, the employees, and all the way down to where students are and how that affects the culture of the schools that you are running. So really excited to be here. We're going to talk a little, every time we do a training, we have to talk about roles and responsibilities. It's just a baseline conversation. So we're going to start that now. So as you know, governing boards are political subdivisions of the state and only have power as granted in statute, either implied or expressed. So there is your PowerPoint slides there's a handout for those if you want to take a look at those. So that's who you are. You know, we take an oath when you become a governing board member. You take an oath to follow the laws of the state of Arizona and the United States of America, and that is part of what we do. We are, by definition, public servants, and that's what you're here to do. So Arizona's Title 15 has 15341 and 15342, and that is a list of what board members must do and can do. And I brought copies of those. You know, if you guys want some good reading material
It's
at night,
edge of your seat kind of material.
you know, that you could read through these. But there are certain things that boards cannot delegate. Most of the items in these lists, 15341, 342, are delegable. So you delegate most of these responsibilities, the vast majority of those, to the superintendent, and whoever the superintendent then provides direction to do that job. So I'm glad Nick's here. If there are any real legal questions, he can answer them, because I have never even played a lawyer on TV, so I can't answer them. But there are things that boards cannot delegate. And so approving policy, right, you are the only body that can do that. Adopting a budget, and the HR responsibilities for the superintendent, whether that's hiring, firing, interviewing, and the performance evaluation responsibility, which must be done annually per state law. So those are the things that you can't let anyone else do. And there are many things that you may still vote on, right? But this is the only thing that you have to vote on, are these things. And all of that happens with a lot of support from the district administration. These policies come from your policy provider, whoever that is, through the superintendent to you as recommendations. But they're your policies. So, the recommendations are recommendations, and you need to follow the law because you have a general counsel here who's going to tell you have to. But you can also work those policies to read the way you want. And I went over a few of your policies, and some of them I was particularly interested in the code of ethics. I thought that was very well done. So that is something that you can do. The policies can change.
Yeah, so if you think about authority, you've got the state constitution, boards are named in the Constitution of Arizona, and then you have ARS, and then you have policy to which you're bound to unless you change them. And the rest, other than what duly identified that you cannot delegate, the rest is given to you by choice, because the administration or the board desires to have consensus around a particular issue.
This is just a little graphic representation. I mean, it's pretty simple, but the board's authority is oversight. The superintendent's authority is operations, and where you meet in the middle is around student success. That's where you meet in the middle. Now, you may not all agree on how to get to that student success, but that is the ultimate goal of where you want to go. This is another chart that I made that I think helps a little bit with the why the boards on the side of the board and the side of the superintendent. So why are you doing something, what are you doing it, how much do you want it done? But then the superintendent is deciding how it gets done, who is doing it, where it's happening, when it's happening. And so you'll see vision, mission, goals, policies, monitoring, and voting on the board side. And then on the superintendent side, you're going to see those objectives, action plans, the regulations, they come up with procedures, they implement policy, and they recommend items to the board for approval. So that's kind of those arrows indicate communication. There should be lots of communication back and forth in there. And you should be able to question one another, right? That's the hallmark of a great board, when you can have conversations, disagree, and move forward without being disruptive about or having divisive relationships. I think that's the most important part. That is the magic of a school board, when people disagree with one another, but they can still move on and do what's best for kids. And I have had a relationship with one of my board members like that in the past, and we are to this day very close friends, and we haven't always agreed, but we put the personal behind and just done what's been best for students. So any questions about any of this? This is, all pretty basic. I know you've all seen this probably more than once, but any questions, thoughts?
Well, that was review.
Yeah, it is review. Absolutely.
Important review.
Yes,
Safety.
yeah, absolutely. Okay, so then your code of ethics policy, BCA, these are the categories that are in that policy. It's a lot more defined than most code of ethics policies, so I think it's really a great document, and I think it's important that you all know what's in there. I used to say, if we as a board and PB don't follow our own policy, how can we expect students and staff members to follow it? So I was always really thoughtful about how are we telling people we are going to do things, and then trying to stick to that, because that was our agreement with our community when we passed those policies. So I would recommend that you really look at those policies, that BCA policy. I think it's a powerful document. So the other thing I wanted to talk about was power and influence. Board members used to get really mad when organizations would say board members have no power. That wasn't really no power. It was no legal power as an individual. But I do want to talk a little bit about how much influence you have and how much perception of power there is that goes along with you, even when you're in the grocery store, or you're at the post office, or you're at yoga. Whatever it is that you do and wherever you go, people think that you've got individual power. You can do things, you can make things happen. And you can, but only as part of a team. So this is something that we talk about a lot, is really trying to be careful about that perception of power and how you're wielding it in the community, or not, not owning that you have influence, or owning that you have too much. So just thinking about that, that is how you get things done when you're on a school board. I think it's probably the number one thing that newly elected board members lament, is that they didn't know they had to get things done, they had to do it as part of a team. That things have to happen in meetings with a quorum, with a vote in favor of whatever it is. So it is a little frustrating sometimes, I think, to have that lack of ability to get things done. I don't know about you, I didn't run for a school board because I wanted to sit around. I ran because I wanted to do something, and that was a hard lesson at first. You're all veterans, so you've probably worked through this already, but I think it's just important to know that there is that influence, and when we talk about power, we're talking about legal authority, and individuals don't have that. Okay, board president, just talk a little bit about that. The board president is a leader among leaders. There's really, I don't think anything's more special about being board president other than having more responsibility. Right? You just have more to do. You have more meetings to go to. You have a responsibility to make sure that everyone on the board has the information that you have. There's lots that that being board president is just the same as everyone else, except that piece of more meetings and being more involved in some of the conversations that are happening in terms of agenda development and that sort of thing. So the board officer positions, this is your policy here with president, you elect a president. Do you do it every year?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So annually, yeah, in January. That's new now, that you don't have to do it by January 15th, just by the end of January, which I think gives some of our more rural districts a little bit of leeway, because they usually have one meeting a month. And then you have a vice president as well. So those are your two officer positions, and you'll see a description of what it is that the president does in that policy. So one of the things that it really looks easy to be board president, but it is not easy. Because you think, well, I've come to these meetings for 8 years. I know how the board, I know how the agenda goes, I know the flow, until you're in the spotlight, and then it's like, I just forgot everything I ever knew about a board meeting. So being efficient and effective is really important, especially as we're seeing more public participation in meetings. Being able to run the meeting, the public participation part, has become more critical. So we'll talk a little bit about efficient and effective, but efficient is you want to maximize the work that you're doing and not waste a lot of time, but you don't want to do it so efficiently that you're not being transparent. So there's that kind of line there that you have to come to some sort of, there's a magic number there's a magic time, and sometimes it's just the board president has to figure out when that is as it's going down.
Let me ask a process question. Do you guys typically do working sessions opposite board meetings?
Well, we call them that, and depending on the historical context, they ended up both having a lot of action items. We're trying to get back to having a regular business meeting and a working session that is more intensively focused on a few topics.
Yes.
So that's the goal.
Yes.
Historically, because during the pandemic there was so much action that needed to take place,
Right.
both meetings were co-opted, but one was a special meeting, one was a regular meeting.
Yeah. So we've seen a really effective practice of having the board meeting be the business meeting, right? And when I was superintendent of a large suburban Indianapolis district, my board would get accused of not having open discussion about things, right? And little did the public know that they spent hours in a working session 2 weeks prior, kind of working through whether it was redistricting or building new construction or capital project fundings and things, the really complex topics that require extensive discussion and education. And then the board meeting would come and motions would pass or with a little discussion, and the public would think that was not good practice when in fact it's really good practice. And so some of that's how you communicate to your public and how you let folks know that if you really want to hear discussion, you come to this session because the business meeting's a business meeting, right? And that builds that trust with transparency that I know has been a topic that you guys have been very interested in, and the Scottsdale community is very interested in. And that's a way to channel that energy, in a way that doesn't, derail a board meeting, so to speak. So, anyway.
It provides an opportunity for you all to sit like this, right? Before the meeting started, Libby and Amy were talking about how they're both from Indiana, but didn't know it until right now, which is, these kinds of opportunities lend itself to those kinds of conversations too.
And it also helps you with open meeting law because you can have discussion without having to worry about an agenda item that requires action. And so you can have, the board shall discuss, and there you go, and you have at it. So anyway, really effective, particularly when you're dealing with complex issues that are socially, hot potatoes, or difficult conversations that you have with your community, things like, enrollment and elementary boundaries and, things that really inspire a lot of emotion.
And I think that we would do one study session in addition to our 2 regular meetings in PB every quarter, so we could have those kind of bigger discussions about things that would be on the agenda that month or those 3 months. So I think it's a great practice. So I think it'd be, healthy to get back into that if that's something the board wants to do. So effective is also.
Ask a question. What are your reactions to that? So the intent is and if you look at policy, the intent is for the special meeting to be more of that discussion, working group, study session, dig into mechanics of things a little bit more than the regular board meeting is a much more formal affair and one that really shouldn't be, deep thesis discussion. So that is the goal, is to get back to that, and you'll see that reflected in how we're developing the agendas now. But I would like your reaction to that. Take your temperature on your thoughts.
I'll share. That was something that I had wanted to do, but it was a tough habit for us to get out of.
Agreed.
Structurally, it was a tough habit to get out of. I think it's important for us to have meetings where we are not taking action, formal action.
Yeah, and the inertia of the status quo is hard. I get this. This is not a criticism at
Right.
all.
No, I'm not taking it as that, because I agree with that.
Okay, very good. So,
Yeah, I feel like we never have any discussions. I mean, I feel like half the time we're voting on things that we've had no discussion on. So I think it's necessary. I mean, because then when we're asking questions, we're getting kind of reprimanded for asking questions about things that we're to vote on, but that we've never had a discussion on. So I would love to see us go to that.
So let's pull that thread a little bit, just out of efficiency. So bigger items, not like a big tentative approval of the budget, for example. We don't have to do a tentative approval of the budget, but it affords an opportunity for questions and understanding why numbers are moving, because numbers move until it's finalized. So something like that, I get that, and I think that's efficient. Plus, it gives everyone an opportunity to kind of digest the information, a little bit of time, field questions from the community, which we all do, and that gives that community time too to kind of digest things. But then there are some more operational things that end up in the consent agenda, and we should just go there because the consent agenda has been something that has been, I don't know, I feel like it's been an inefficient, it should be an efficiency tool, and I don't know that it's entirely been an efficiency tool the way that it should be. So how do we get back to that? And I think some of it, as I observed, was, let's pull this out because I want to talk about it. But some of the things like personnel items, we cannot have discussions on personnel items, like things like that. So there are categories where I think the discussion items for special meetings are appropriate, but there are boundaries, right, of where this Venn diagram, when you do not sit. So I do want to caution if there is an opportunity or if something comes up, let's say there's a request. I would like us to just be thoughtful about where our space is on the Venn diagram, which is slide number. Are your slides numbered? Yes, thank you. Thank you for seeing your slides. You haven't figured that out. So that would be my only kind of to add to that as a bookend. I'm not disagreeing with you at all. I think we do need to have those discussions and among each other as opposed to just these kind of siloed email communications. And I hope that it would, and maybe Dr. Minslow, you can react to that. Do you think it would help the staff to be kind of more efficient with us in terms of knowing what we're asking and why we're asking and where we're going?
I think the format is a lot better when we focus on a deeper dive on the big topics when it's in a study session. It does allow for something that feels more conversational. We still end up with at the NDA, they're still at a podium, so that creates more of a formal sense versus this kind of conversation. But overall, having the opportunity to have those discussions before it gets to a regular meeting is helpful. The one thing I was going to look up, because I don't remember how it says it in policy, we've been, for the last few months at least, really careful about putting any action item on a special, actually we don't do consent, we only do consent. Right, there's no consent on that. Consent is only on the other. So we've been trying to be more disciplined, because what was happening is if something missed a deadline for a board book, then it would just get put on the next meeting, whether or not it was, the consent was there. So we've tried to shift that so that any action item at the special meeting is one that is time sensitive. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, it should be on the regular meeting agenda. So I think the more we keep working at this, we'll retrain the muscle memory. It had just been that so much was coming so fast and furious that the consent ended up on being both agendas, and then there was really no material difference between the two.
Yeah. And I think that's a fair comment, that action items that are going to make it onto the special agendas are time sensitive. So, sometimes things are just, they have to be done by a certain date in order to, like employment contracts and different things don't usually show up on special meetings, but we have had things that have shown up that are time sensitive and they can't be tabled.
And Madam President, if I could interject, so it does, that model does require the superintendent's team to be more prepared in advance to plan for a monthly meeting versus a bi-weekly meeting. And so you have to kind of think ahead as a senior cabinet member that I got to have these things ready, whether it's field trip approvals or, whatever it might be, POs and the finances and all, so that you don't get backed into the corner where the superintendent calls the board president and says, oh, we got to, there's 5 items I really need your, and then all of a sudden, and then to use someone's term, that muscle memory and the inertia revert back to a model whereby all of a sudden you're doing the same thing over and over again. And so, finely tuned big districts where the board and superintendent fit hand in glove are able to, learn that over time and get better and better at it. So.
And I think the other thing that I would, well, I'm not going to talk, you guys talk.
I guess what I'm hearing is an alignment, at least on goals, to tack more towards that different, a different approach into two different meetings as opposed to having two meetings that are very similar. So
It should
support
feel different,
for continuing to tack that direction, but appreciate that it does mean that the administration of getting there to enable it might also take a little muscle
Right.
memory or
Sure.
whatever you refer to
Well,
it.
it's a higher
Breaking
bar
from
to
the
get
inertia.
something on an agenda if we haven't been forward-thinking enough as a leadership team in terms of what needs to be on the consent agenda or a regular meeting agenda. Then the challenge is for those things that are really time sensitive that we need to be able to explain it. If it looks like it should have been on consent and we just missed the window, that's different than something that emerges that requires attention and we just don't have enough time.
Right.
So the other thing I would do is have a conversation around, what are the kinds of items you want to talk about in this study session, work session, finance, curriculum, all the things that take a lot more kind of thought and a lot more questions. And I think when you have two times to discuss something, you're probably way more prepared than you are if you just have that one meeting to do it. So I think it's great.
And to accentuate what Julie's saying and Board Member Carney, so a lot of times boards are forced into recommended approvals without appropriate soak time. It just happens because things move fast in a complex environment like you guys have. And it gives you soak time, consideration time, and it gives time for the administration to add value to the discussion as more questions arise and board members have questions that maybe aren't immediately answerable in the working session but can be followed up by the superintendent later. And so,
So are we talking about the working session being the special meeting?
Yeah, the special
Okay, because
session.
then I'm confused because, the board voted 3-2 to cut 5 special meetings. So how would we?
Oh, I'm referring to the policy
get those back.
structure for those two different meetings. We, that vote, if I remember correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, was the board calendar, the board meeting calendar.
Right, so
which
we
is
cut 5
different than the
meetings.
policy.
Right.
Those were in favor of town halls, the learning community town halls, right? But yes, on its face, the calendar was shortened for board meetings.
Right.
But that was where that vote was. It wasn't a policy vote.
No, I know. I'm just saying, so we have even less time to discuss things because we're down to 5 less meetings. So I think that's difficult.
I think we have met the meeting numbers the same, but it looks different. And I'm just going to throw this out there. When you made the comment, we keep getting reprimanded for asking questions.
Mm-hmm.
And then we cut, and you brought that up in meetings in the past, or we cut another meeting, or the meeting that was canceled, I think was your term. That passive-aggressive comment does not help us create trust as a board. And I feel like please stop, because that's not true to say we keep getting reprimanded for asking questions. And the rolling the eyes right there.
But Julie, I don't think we should go there because
Why
there's so
not,
much
though?
passive aggressiveness that you have placed upon myself.
I'm not a passive-aggressive person. If
Okay.
there's something that needs to be addressed, I will address it.
Yeah, I've never even spoken to you. You never had a conversation with me. I don't want to go there because we had a lot of issues. We have a lot of issues.
But the point of tonight is for us to realize we do have some common goals and we do
Absolutely,
have shared goals.
I
I'm not
absolutely-
pointing you out.
yeah.
I'm just, that is the point of tonight, and to understand and appreciate we have common goals, right? We do. Everybody, when we ran around and said why we ran, it all came back to students.
Yeah.
And that's where we need to stay focused. We're not the same person. That's okay. We're adults. We all have the emotional maturity to see our way to the center, which is the touchstone, and that is these kids. So that's where we're gonna focus tonight. That's why we're here.
And
Okay.
you all have constituents, and people voted for you.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you were all here, there's 5 of you, and each of you were elected by large numbers of people, and you have your constituents. And the reason we have boards is because school districts are democratically governed. And it's okay to have spitting matches. I mean, that's part of public governance. It's okay.
I think the other thing is
Not literally.
Right.
not literally.
But it's okay. I mean, the president we're all different people and all, and this should feel good because this school district has so many fabulous assets, and you guys are all highly educated, professional people that want to do good things, or you wouldn't be here. You've got a top drawer superintendent. You've got one of the most highly respected school districts in the whole West. And, being a backbone of this community is very feasible for the 5 of you. It just is.
And I think the other thing, there are going to be individual disagreements. And I can tell you that when I was a board member, I made a statement in a public meeting that another one of my board members was upset about. She really thought that I embarrassed her during a meeting, unintentionally. I didn't think that had happened. She called me the next day and she said, are you home? And I said, yeah. And she said, I'm coming to your house. And I was like, oh. You're in trouble. Like you've done something, I'm not exactly sure what. But it was one of those moments for me in my leadership journey that was an epiphany of she taught me how to be a better team member. And I think about it like a family, right? There are opportunities. If Julie and Amy need to talk things out, you can do that one-on-one. It doesn't have to be done in a meeting. If Libby and Julie have something to talk about, you can do that one-on-one. And I would encourage you to do that as much as you can. And if you feel you can't, that's okay too. But you have to move on, right? You have to consider what happened, whatever vote was made, and live with being the minority if you were, and trying not to hold that against people. And that's hard. That is really hard. And I, for a while, was a minority on my board, and it was not fun going to movies.
It's like a movie sometimes, right?
Popcorn at the board meetings. Come on, Julie.
So, I remember.
Wow, what is on my brain? No, going to meetings was not always fun.
No.
It wasn't. But it was the job I signed up for.
One time I'm sorry, go ahead. Dr. Menza.
I was just going to add for context and maybe some way to think about it. So when the board meeting calendar was adopted, there were questions about reducing the number of meetings, and there was rationale for it. The one part of the rationale that hasn't been discussed tonight, but just by way of reference, is the amount of staff time involved in putting together the agendas for 2 times a month's meetings, where they had essentially de facto been 2 business meetings because they were structurally the same. So we were trying to decouple that structure, so you had 1 business meeting, and then you had special meetings, but they weren't happening all at the same time at the same cadence, which gave a little bit more breathing room for staff, with an expectation that the staff would be able to provide material further in advance for governing board consideration. That was some of the working theory. And we said we can schedule additional meetings as needed. And so now when I look back at where we've been, we've already scheduled a number of additional meetings subsequent to having adopted the calendar in order to get our work done. This would be one of them that was not contemplated on the calendar, but I think really important. But in setting the agenda for March 5th and talking about questions that came up at our last board meeting, we said we need another meeting. And so we looked at March 26th. That's why you have the save the date on your calendar, because there are conversations that surface from board questions that really require board dialogue. They can't be easily and appropriately addressed in a B memo. And so I think our commitment was that when we have the need, when there's sufficient weighty topics for conversation, we can add those back to the calendar. And we may decide that that doesn't work in the future, but that was the working hypothesis when we put that forward for consideration.
Makes total sense. Just another story to reflect on Julie's comment about her board service. I was a young superintendent, and in an open board meeting, I made a comment that really ticked off one of my board members. And it was like ice, right? And the next morning I called my board president and I said, I think I really made a mistake with Stu. And he goes, yeah, Tim, you're in trouble. I said, oh God, what should I do? And he goes, you need to call Stu and go to his office and practice some humility. And I said, but I wasn't wrong. And he goes, my board president was a great guy, and I'm still friendly with. He says, it doesn't matter. He said, in my eyes you were wrong. You might think you were wrong, but you need to take care of it. So I did, and I learned a lot. And just part of the interpersonal dynamic of working in highly complex interpersonal environments in the public. It's just part of the gig. So.
And not by choice. You're not working together by choice. You ran to work on a board, but it's like I always say, it's a little bit like family, right? My brother married a woman that I now have to get along with because she's part of the family. And that's kind of how it is being a board member too. You've got to find a way to work. You've got to try to find a way to work with one another. And sometimes it's really difficult to do that.
I want to reinforce, though, I do feel like we do have a shared goal. And maybe it's just
Absolutely.
one, but I think we have a shared goal. I'm here because of kids, and I believe that every one of you are here because of kids. So if we could just hang on to that as we move forward, because that is who loses if we can't figure this out, right? If we can't keep moving forward in a mature way. So, and that nobody wants that. I don't believe any of you.
Thank you. No, I think that's great.
Can I say something?
I don't know, can
Yeah.
May I?
you? May.
Julie's comment on family is what. Yeah, it's a family. It might be kind of dysfunctional family sometimes. My family at home is dysfunctional sometimes. But like this little issue right here, I don't want it to just scab over. I don't think we're going to fix it all. I think a one-on-one would probably be great for lots of people in this room. But one thing you said, Amy, about feeling reprimanded, if there's some process that's happening that makes you feel like you've been reprimanded when you ask a question, obviously if I'm at the lectern and you're asking me a question, I don't want to reprimand you. I don't want to reprimand anybody, here, make you feel that way. So could you just kind of share on that, or what it was that you were getting at? Because if it's a process issue, we can fix that, right? If it's a relationship issue, then we might have to talk a little bit more.
I think I'd like to go back to why did we not have this last year? We were the only new board to not get a board retreat. I'd asked several times for a board retreat and was told that they weren't willing to do it. So
I think, as I recall, it was a struggle of getting all 5 board members there, and for me, to have 4 there was not going to be an effective retreat of any form.
But I never had one time a date come to me that I said no to. So I don't know. This should have been done a year ago. In my opinion, this is very difficult to do right now, after all of many, many things that we've gone through. And I personally have been treated with disrespect, and that's by our board president. And I've never had a conversation with her, nothing, and it's still coming. And I think it's just because I was elected to the board. I have no idea. I have no idea where it's coming from, but it's been like this.
Well, and I wonder, do you want to know? Because I tried to have a conversation here as a collective group, and you said you didn't want to talk about it.
What do you mean? But I'm saying in a year, you've never reached out to me. I say hello to you in a meeting, and it's like you can't even say hello. It's a very toxic environment.
Okay.
It is.
Right. So here's the thing, and we can look back and say we should have done a lot of things. What I want to focus on right now is that you're all here, and that's the good news. And then you can use this to have momentum forward. And there may be things that you have to go back and visit. And maybe you don't want to do that. Maybe you can just call it say, okay, I'm going to let it go and we're going to move forward from here. That's hard to do sometimes. There are things that you can get a mediator to help you. There are ways that it can happen if there's interest. If there's not, I think for the good of the district, it's going to have to be, I'm going to let that go and I'm going to move forward and I'm going to do the best I can with the relationships that I have.
Yeah.
And I would really, again, encourage these kinds of conversations that are more informal, more, I want to hear what you have to say. I would suspect you agree on things more often than you don't in terms of what you want to happen. Now, getting there, right? I might take this road and you might take that road, but we can come somewhere we can meet to come together to do what's best for students in Scottsdale. So if Tim and I can be any help in how you move forward in this in the relationships in the board, we'd be happy to do that. So
Absolutely.
you can just
That's our why.
Yeah.
That's our why. I mean, we each are electing to do this kind of work because we believe in it. And there's a lot of ways to spend your time and energy, and we choose to do this.
And I think there's value to what you're all saying, right? There's value to all 5 board members being at these kinds of things, because if you don't hear the discussion, it's going to be hard, at a regular meeting to kind of weigh in on it or understand where the people are coming from. So I think you all have really valid points, and I hope this can be used as the catalyst to kind of move forward, everybody, because you have an election this year.
And 10 months of working together as this team, then the team is going to change again.
Yes.
But setting cultural expectation for how, regardless of who the 5 board members are, we're going to work together in service of the kids in the district. That's the most important work we can do. And so I would agree. It would have been great to have a retreat last year. We didn't have one. I can't change that at all. So we have it now. And my hope is that by the time we end tonight, we have some agreement about how we can work together as 5 people who took an oath of office to uphold the Constitution of the United States and the state of Arizona, and among other things, you did this so that we can advance the agenda for kids. So that's my goal, and I thought it was really important to be able to have the conversation. And the extent to which, to your point, Julie, people are wired differently. When I can't undo something, I'm a forward-facing kind of person. Okay, where do we go from here, and how do we do what we need to do to make this the very best district it can be? Some people need some closure or need the opportunity to process. And when I'm a person who's ready to move on and my wife is not, I have to be the one who goes back and says, okay, let me figure out what I did wrong here. Just because otherwise
you're not moving forward.
Exactly. It drops up again. So
yeah.
I think that there is a way forward. I believe that there is, and so I appreciate the tone you're setting and the opportunity to have the conversation.
And what we know from past practice in other places is culture emanates from the top down. It just does. And the conversations around the water cooler in every one of your schools, the culture reinforces itself and it comes from you. It just does. That's just the nature of organizations.
Yes. So it seems like ridiculous to talk now about efficient and effective meetings, frankly. But let's finish this up, and then we can move on to the shared agreements, which I think will garner a lot more conversation. So we're just going to quickly talk about effective meetings, and both of these, in efficient and effective, you're going to see the idea of a consent agenda, because it does make meetings more efficient. And it can make meetings more effective. And I think it's really important, because I've heard some conversation around that, to define what a consent agenda item is. The definition for that is what you make it, right? Because it's your board. But to have definition around what that looks like and what cannot be pulled out, what by law, right? Because there is statute that doesn't allow you to discuss some things in open meetings. But to really understand, these are the things we're going to put on consent, and to have that definition be created by the board and the superintendent team. So that you know what is going on there is routine business. That's what it's intended to do. Routine business. It's not intended to be somewhere to hide something. Kind of putting something in there that has to do with, as Tim said, elementary boundaries. Not a good idea, right? Because that's not what that's intended to be. Unless you've already had 25 meetings about elementary boundaries.
And then it should just be a business item.
And then it should just be a business item, an approval item. So that is part of both effective and efficient meetings. I think effective meetings also really looking at what the district's goals are, what your strategic priorities are, making sure that the board is spending time on that. And you're spending less time on operations and more time on vision, mission, strategy, student success, and student achievement, because that's what you're there for.
Can I ask a question of the board member?
Yeah, of course.
Because it relates to this. And so one idea I had, I'd like to run by all of you, and that is at the end of our regular meetings, there's a request for other items that you'd like to see, future items. Sometimes those are items that kind of are better suited for a B memo because they tend to be data heavy, or there's just a lot of context, and that's not really a great presentation. However, I was thinking, just to make sure because there's been some pushback on some of the items, including some of mine, but tying, when you're making these requests, to identify the KPI, or if it's a policy question, the policy that you're asking about. That way we stay in strategic zone. And those KPIs were developed by us. We approved them, and they are strategic goals tied to the strategic plan. So that was just thinking of one way to operationalize kind of efficiency and effectiveness of the types of agenda items we're all bringing to the table. So what are your thoughts on that?
I think that makes sense, because then it's pulling it back to, it's not about distrust or not being prepared, but it's about focusing on our objectives and why we exist as a governing board, policy-based or our overall plan for the district.
Any thoughts about that? And I guess the other side of that coin is, if it's hard to find, or if there's only a tenuous connection to a KPI, then maybe this isn't the governing board lane. It doesn't mean you can't have your conversation with Dr. Menzel in your one-on-one about whatever you have your conversation on. That's fine. It's just whether it ends up on a board agenda item. So that's what I'm trying to focus on when I think about when we develop these agenda items.
Right.
How do we really put those guardrails around so that we can be efficient and effective to the strategy as governance.
And that helps the leadership team as well, because preparing for the board agenda items and all of the backup material, when you can see how it aligns with the key performance indicators the board has asked for, then that work doesn't feel like it's taking you off of what the expectations are. Sometimes some questions feel like, well, that's coming from left field. Not that it's a bad question, but it's just not connected to the other work. And so then people struggle to figure out, how do I add one more thing to my plate when I'm trying to get these things done that the board set as KPIs?
Well, again, kind of back to one of the earlier points, and that is, out of fairness, we asked the administration to put on the consent agenda the KPI that the item relates to. So kind of the same goes.
Right.
If we can kind of help do that same kind of reciprocal mapping, it might be one way to operationalize. But I'm open to other ideas and your feedback on that.
Are there any concerns about doing that? Any questions about it?
As long as the B memos are accurate and not vague.
Right.
to where conversations that you have are different than what's on the B memo.
So we're talking about B memo or what's going to be on the agenda?
I was talking about what's going to be in these.
Yeah, and I think that part of the differentiation is sometimes there are questions that end up in a B memo that may not be as directly related. And so I think what Dr. Hartwells is saying, for things that are on future agenda topics, to have the direct connection to a KPI or policy elevates it to that level. I think there are likely many more areas for B memos that are important information for governing board members to have. And when those get done could be calibrated based on the urgency of the information. But I think Vice President Lindsay's comment is making sure that the information that's provided is accurate and consistent with respect to what people put in the memo and what people are saying in other conversations. Did I hear you correctly?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree with that.
Great.
Thank you.
So all board members have an opportunity to participate. That is critical in board, but that you're not monopolizing conversations. And that's kind of because we're all so passionate, it's kind of hard to stop talking about something that you're super passionate about. But I think that helps make them more effective. Let's talk a little bit about efficiency. Meeting protocols are followed. The consent agenda, again, is utilized. Rules of order are followed so that you know what happens when. The call to the public is consistent no matter the topic or the speaker or the topic that the speaker is speaking on. It's whatever your limit is, and the same reaction to every single person who speaks. And then, if you had a board calendar, which it sounds like you kind of do have a board calendar, but if you knew what was coming up, that might help you also when you're with those future agenda items to say, I know we're going to be talking about this in May. Here are some of the things that I'd like addressed in that, presentation, that discussion. So those are the things.
Do we have that?
We didn't
We
get
don't
that this
have
year. We got one last year, not this year.
What, I'm sorry?
A
We don't have
master
that.
type of master
Yeah.
calendar.
I just I haven't
Sent it
I
out
haven't
this.
sent it out, and I'm constantly updating it because it's always changing.
Sure, it's a
So
dynamic
I mean, I don't
document.
even know. I should send it out at the beginning
At the beginning of the year,
and then
subject to change.
subject, yes, because it's changing every other day.
Is
Well,
there-
it probably changes.
Because there
All
are
the
some
time.
things that
Yeah.
there are statutory timelines.
Yeah.
So those will be relatively consistent. And then there are others where we historically have discussed them at a certain time, and that can either move up or back depending on whatever else is on the agenda and how much time we have. But giving that template, I mean, Gladys has been putting that together over the last 3.5 years.
Sure.
I knew it was under construction. Is it a document like a Google Doc or a Google Excel?
It's
that
the
you
Word
can just
doc.
See, so no, it's not.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I could put it on
Do a
the
read
Google
only.
Doc.
Since
Good
it's
idea.
dynamic,
Mm-hmm.
and you can just be the person who
Yeah.
changes it. But at least
Well,
we
if
can
it's
see it.
password protected, you guys could go in
Right.
at any time
Mm-hmm.
and take a look at it.
Yep.
So.
I could do that.
Am I the only one who hates Google here?
I hate it.
Okay, just checking.
Yeah, there's a few. There's a few.
Can't ever find anything.
There's a
Okay, great. So board president's job isn't easy, and as I said, it is that the board president's task to reach a happy medium to decide when a sufficient number of details have been discussed and when it's time to reach a decision or go on to other matters. If you're a board president and you have a sense of humor, and I sure hope you do, this is a good place to use it. So there is that kind of magic time where you're like, we're not going to agree on this tonight, so I think we should add this to the next agenda and talk about it next time. Or, whatever, is there an amendment? There are things that the board president can do to move it along, and that you all can do to move it along too, if that's something you choose to do. And I'm done talking.
Do we need a stretch break?
I do, but you can keep
Okay.
talking without me.
Let's do a stretch break, 5 minutes. And then when you come back, the first page of this, review this before we start back up at 10 after. How's that sound? Perfect. All right. Yep. Thank you.
Sounds like you've been doing this before.
Not a rookie.
I don't like eating in front of people.
Taking a call.
How are you?
She works there.
I know your face is.
Wow, we never made that connection. Yeah, of course.
She said she talked to you.
Absolutely.
See you. So you're here.
Thank you. I didn't know
We're trying to reconvene here.
Thank you.
Go ahead, yes.
Okay, the second half of our workshop tonight, we want to focus on this document called Board Norms and Shared Agreements. And on the cover, I've kind of written you a little philosophical piece that I believe sort of overcasts our work. And I don't need to read it to you, but I totally believe in the potential of Scottsdale Unified and the unspoken truth about school board leadership and district culture. And so that's for your digestion. And what we've done in conjunction with Julie and in observing the district over the last, since we were invited to engage in this activity, is take some liberties with regards to things that good practice across the country in school board effectiveness has been identified here as things to talk about. And our hope is, in presenting these items to you, is that the five of you can come to consensus around these topics, if not tonight, sometime in the future. And, you know, this probably doesn't rise to the level of board policy, but many boards around the valley have adopted board norm and protocols similar to this. And so some of these have come from Julie's and Tim's experience. Some of it has come from good practice in some of your colleagues across the country. So that being said, it's a draft document for discussion. And like I said, you know, Julie and Tim's hope is that this doesn't die in a philosophical vacuum, that it becomes something that the board can bring forward as you continue to do your work. So starting with the first page, each member of the board commits to the following. And we've talked about the first one here. And then, so what we've done is cross-reference your board policies, which we discussed in the opening session. So remember, my first primary concern is the welfare of the students. We've talked about that. And as a professional governing board member, be committed to come prepared, be courteous and listening to the others, and work collaboratively in your decision making, and have transparency, which we've stressed. Decisions being made on available facts and independent judgment, and refusing to surrender the judgment to special interest groups, which are that's complex but very necessary. Respect and support the majority of the decisions, and remember that each of you represents 20% of the body. And adhere to the standards of ethical conduct and confidentiality, and there's your board policy referencing that. In addition, being respectful of fellow board members and patrons and parents, in person and online. Understand the board has one employee, and that is Dr. Menzel, and that your role as a board member is to provide oversight and ensure Scottsdale Unified is well managed and that you really have no management responsibilities. And recognize your fiduciary responsibility to ensure the resources are being distributed appropriately. That's a lot of information on one page, and I'll stop and entertain questions and comments.
So this is as a document. How have other boards used this document?
Thank you. Great question. A number of boards, dozens and dozens of boards, not just in the Valley, but across the state and even nationally, have adopted codes of conduct, board norms, kind of communication protocols. It's become common practice. And it's become even more common practice in light of the emotion and public policy debates that began in 2020 when we all faced things that we had never faced before. And all of our publics became more engaged in our actions as school boards and school leaders. And so as we all wrestled with these big emotional debates in public, more and more school districts across the state and nation have reverted to these kinds of things in this kind of a setting to establish ways for boards to work effectively together in light of the complexities of the issues that you guys deal with. Because face it, this is not simple, easy work. This is highly sophisticated, complicated business. And the more you can agree on practice, rituals, the more effective you will be at problem solving and decision making when the next tough issue comes. So that's, Madam President, the concept here. And so we have found in our work that talking about these things when the spotlight isn't on is way more effective than when it is on. And so this is your opportunity to really, arm wrestle some of these things and be comfortable with them. And as I said in the beginning, I don't think anybody expects board policy to evolve from this, but board resolution is a common expectation for many boards.
And many boards take this and discuss it in a meeting and vote on it and agree to it. And then in Paradise Valley, we posted it on our website. Everybody signed it, and we posted it so that we were held accountable by the community, and we had, a reference point for ourselves as well.
And in light of school board elections this fall, it becomes even more important because the things that are going to happen around board elections, of course. And so, you just can't not say that. It's just part of the process. So, yeah, go ahead.
Can I ask you, did you work on this document with anyone else? Did you have a conversation with anyone
I wrote it.
in the district?
Julie and I consulted on it. I ran it past Dr. Scott, but ultimately it's my work and copying from past practice, some things that I learned in learning about you, and some input and discussion with Julie also.
I have a question for Nick.
For me?
You done? Thank you. So this document was not agendized, and this looks like something that you just said that would come back to us as a resolution that we would vote for. Wouldn't that be violating the open meeting law? It's ARS 38-431-02.
Well, the statement about coming back as a resolution, I think that would be a legal action. There's no action item on it today. I don't have the agenda in front of me. I believe the document itself wasn't agendized?
No, it wasn't, and neither was this one. And it says, obviously we have a quorum, which was addressed by President Hartwell at the beginning of the meeting, and the ARS 38-431-02 says that we must list the specific matters to be discussed.
I know what the open meeting law is. And
I'm sorry?
I know what the open meeting law is.
Okay.
Yeah.
So should this have been agenda? So we already have an issue with open meeting law. We were, this just happened again. So I want to ensure that we're following the rules and the laws, particularly as this may come back for a vote.
I have to look at what the agenda says.
This is,
She's looking at the formal.
gotcha, the formal agenda.
The board retreat, the agenda states 3, introduction and commence retreat. The board retreat will be facilitated by Dr. Timothy Oakland and Julie Bacon. And were these linked?
No.
Well, I think there's no action item, so we don't have to be concerned about taking legal action. If there was a consensus today in which everyone decided that this was going to be the document, that I think that would be a clear open meeting law violation. So to that point, I think it would be appropriate for me to advise everyone not to have any consensus, really just to review the document or
Ask
the
questions,
discussion.
Right.
But since there will be no legal action taken, I don't think it would be a violation to discuss it.
And the number one matters to be discussed. And again, if there wasn't this heightened sensitivity around the open meeting law and us having those issues, it wouldn't have stuck out to me, but I did notice that it was not on the agenda. And just want to ensure that everyone here is properly protected.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah, I like I said, since there's no legal action, my cautionary advisement to the board would be to not have any consensus on a document. It definitely could have been agendized a little bit more thoroughly to pass the reasonable person test, but it's also a board retreat, which is pretty broad in nature. So.
And we have no expectation
Yeah,
of
but I mean,
developing
it's
consensus, so it's really discussion.
Okay, because the expected outcome is to have consensus, so.
Develop consensus. Well, good point. Yeah. All right, I guess.
So can we at least have a discussion on the merits of the content? I mean, it's mostly our policies, right? I don't want to drive a consensus to an agenda item. I didn't think that was our outcome for tonight anyway. I mean, some of it is just to get us all talking together in maybe considering rowing in the same direction. My view is this document could be something that could serve as an operational framework, at least in large part, because a lot of it's policy anyway. But I think it's the concept of, you know, as a new board member coming in, it is hard to know kind of how you operationalize all that energy and all the good things you want to do. And so I think there's some merit in having an operational framework. But in terms of the items here, I don't see anything in here that it's either factual or it's policy. I think we give everyone a few minutes to read through it since we didn't have it in advance, and then if something sticks out as maybe counter to your understanding, or you want to suss out something a little bit more, we can just talk about those. Again, most of these are cross-reference to our policies, but
No, we did have it in
not
advance.
with that.
We had it in advance.
Oh, okay. Well, sorry, I didn't read it in advance.
I think we got it on Thursday.
Yeah.
Okay, so this was on the doc. Okay.
It's just not on
It's not on
public
the
agenda.
It was on board docs.
It wasn't on board.
Right.
Okay.
I think it was physically sent.
Right.
Right.
So those are your slides, right? Those are the two
Kind of a
documents.
different interpretation of the slides, right?
Well, if you had a chance to look at it in advance, did anything stick out as, yeah, that's really good for us all to remember, or we could do better about that, or?
Let's focus on the first page. What kind of discussions are relative to the bulleted points on the first page?
Can I,
Of course.
I have one that stood out to me that I'd like for you to explain. The render decisions based on available facts and independent judgment and refuse to surrender that judgment to individuals or special interest groups.
Mhm.
Can you explain that?
Sure. The today's environment has trained, this is my opinion, has trained people to organize, to try to influence board member decision making. And we see it all over, not just in Scottsdale, whereby a particular PTO group, a particular sports advocacy group, or whatever it might be, somehow through either the quantity of people who may come to a board meeting to try to influence, or campaigns and petitions and things like that. And while we want to be transparent and we want to listen to our patrons, ultimately the decision comes down to the philosophical foundations of Scottsdale Unified that is in your policy, your mission, vision, and goals I have here somewhere, and your policies. And kind of back to the beginning where Julie started us off, you know, you get your constitution, and you've got ARS law, statute, and you have board policy. And ultimately, you're responsible to those. And while support groups and advocacy groups are sometimes well-intended, or sometimes they're selfishly intended, you know, I believe your job is to sort that out and to follow your true north in decision making. That's what I'm trying to verbalize there.
So one piece of advice I had gotten from a past board member when I first joined the board was cautioning that volume, quantity doesn't mean quality in terms of translating, you know, a position. Just because 10 people advocate a certain position doesn't necessarily mean it's in the best interest of the district. And so to just balance that quality, quantity. And actually that advice came in handy for me on a number of occasions since being on the board.
And social media makes this even more complicated and, you know, more user-friendly for patrons to try to influence you. It just is. So that's just the way of the world right now.
I think the other thing this is saying is also, you know, we all live in our own little bubbles and we do it by choice. But, you know, as a board member, I had a responsibility to understand what people were thinking outside my bubble. And so, you know, that is that let me hear everything from within and outside my bubble, and then allow me to make a decision based on what I think is the best interest of students. So I kind of think that's what this is, you know, a combination of those.
Are we not doing that? That's what
No,
I'm
no, no.
confused on.
No.
Are we not doing that?
I don't know if you're not doing it or are doing it. I mean, I'm a patron, you know, of the district, and to be really frank with you, I don't know. All I'm saying is, in my experience, boards can get derailed if individual board members get particularly heavily influenced by a particular group, whether it's a PTO or a parent group or a sports advocacy group or a political group or something like that. And true north is the best description I can, you know, kind of put in description, because people put you in these seats because they trusted you, right?
And don't take these as these are things that you have to improve, right? This is meant to be a document that will guide this board and future boards. It's not really about how you're functioning specifically, but it is about how boards function and best practices. It's not specific to you.
Right.
Yeah.
Except for Tim and I did have a conversation about the crosswalk with our policies, because I thought anytime you could align the potential shared agreements or norms of how we're going to work together, when you can connect that with the policy the board's adopted, it kind of streamlines and puts in one place, because the policy is, you know, a thick document. We don't read it all the time and haven't committed to memory. So to be able to have something that's in 2 pages that references the policy, so we can go back and say, okay, here's the full text, but gives us the shorthand version, that was part of what I thought was valuable here.
Right, and that was input from Dr. Scott. Other thoughts on the first page?
I think it's always a good reminder and humbling, a humbling good reminder that we are only effective as a team and as a group, and the majority at the end of the day, whether you are in it or not, that's how the board functions. So just kind of going back to that collaboration and teamwork, and that's why, another reason why I think it was really important to do this. Why we're doing it.
Okay, let's move on. Top of the second page, we would be committed as a point of discussion to inform the superintendent of appointments and communication with school personnel, and be vigilant about the time you spend with employees, recognizing that they already have full-time jobs. And a problem area for most boards is the second one: refer the superintendent complaints, problems, or issues from parents and community members or staff. that is a really tricky one for board members, veterans, rookies, everywhere. And, you know, Julie used the example of when you're at the grocery store, and it's very true and it's real. And people come up and say, how about that principal at XYZ elementary school? Can you believe what they did last week? And, you know, all of a sudden now the microphone's on. And we used to say that the microphone's always on. You know, for your superintendent and for your 5 board members, the microphone's always on. And what you say and how you handle those kinds of situations will be repeated. It just will. And you have very good policy, and I've referenced it there, on how to manage those things. And there's value in the 5 of you communicating with one another about those kind of things. How did you handle that? How did, you know, when they complained about the football coach or complained about whatever it might be, and, you know, a typical response might be something like, I'm so glad you brought that up. You know, I can't really interact with you on that topic, but I will sure forward it to Dr. Menzel and have him do some homework. And someone from the district will get back to you. I mean, it can be that simple. You can be that Teflon and still, you know, file it away as an important piece of information for you. And that's just good boardsmanship. Because the minute you tip your hand, like, oh my Lord, I heard about that, that's just horrible. Well, you just engaged. And, you know, from an interpersonal perspective, that's dangerous. But from a legal and policy perspective, it's also dangerous because should a hearing come to you, you are potentially biased in the future. And you create that opportunity for someone to challenge you as an arbiter in a hearing should there be a personnel issue down the way. And so you really have to be very careful from that perspective also.
I've gotten in the habit of CCing Dr. Menzel in replies that I feel are out of the purview of the governing board, and referring to him in my response saying that someone will get back to you.
Yeah, right. And that's what you're employing him to do, right? You don't need to do that work. You just don't need to. That's not your job.
And it also brings him into the conversation that there's an issue,
right,
perceived by someone.
And that there may be a serious issue.
Right.
I mean, maybe that's a real gem that you've just been, maybe that's a real soft pitch that you've just been given by a patron that needs action. That often happens, that you hear about things in those environments that actually are really concerning. So, other thoughts? Third bullet, understand and comply with policies. It's pretty self-explanatory, but that is also referenced in your board policy book. Serving as an ambassador of the district, but not a spokesperson. That's another very tricky piece of effective board members. And I'm sure each of the 5 of you have been around enough to know that sometimes decisions are made that are not the same decision that you would make. It just happens. That's part of a big, complicated organization. And you have to be able effectively to be an ambassador and supportive of SUSD, but yet not be the spokesperson. And your policy specifically references the superintendent and the board president as the spokespeople. And so you need to learn to dance on the head of a pin. It's the best way you handle that kind of thing. Fifth, board.
Stop you for a second.
Of course.
You just said that you worked with Dr. Menzel on this, to present this document to us to work on today.
We talked about it a month ago, maybe, yeah.
Okay, so you put together a document, contributed to bring forth a document that we are all supposed to discuss. Clearly, I did my homework. I actually took this very seriously because I thought it was a good idea. But I do still have concerns about the open meeting violations, considering you were working with them on it, and then you put it forth to us today, and for this ultimately at some point would come and be a document that we would vote on. and I'm just not comfortable with moving forward with it. Unless you want to specifically,
Well, like I said,
I mean, we can sit here and listen to you and have it be an educational piece, but for us to be discussing anything would be a violation of open meeting law per KRS. And I didn't notice this until I was leaving tonight and printed out the agenda after I'd worked on it all day, so it's,
well, for the record, I'm looking at my email, the items were sent out to everyone on Thursday. The agenda was posted on Friday at 2:11. And I think if there's any deficiency in the agenda, it's that it doesn't specify that this document would be discussed.
I believe the document would need to be on there.
I don't think the document needs to be posted, but it could be listed with more specificity. I'm looking at the Attorney General handbook.
And yeah, I think we can all agree that, I'm sorry, let me just finish and then I'll
No, go ahead.
There's been a lot of scrutiny and a lot of light that's been shining on Scottsdale Unified, and it has not been necessarily good light. And so I thought in 2024 we could, start on a different foot and actually follow the laws, and particularly with open meeting law. This has been plaguing us for a couple of years now.
Well, my legal opinion on this particular matter is that the boards get a lot more wiggle room when it's a meeting such as this, a retreat. And I'm looking directly at the Attorney General handbook, which is where all attorneys go to look at this. So it's contents of the agenda for a public meeting. The agenda for a public meeting must contain a listing of the specific matters to be discussed, considered, or decided at the meeting. There's nothing being decided here, but there are things being discussed. And it does depend on what type of meeting it is. And so while I think that this one could have been more specific, it is definitely towards the far end of what is permissible. And it could go either way. So I mean, I get your point. I agree with you that it should have been more specific. Clearly there's no consensus here. I think people in the community know what a retreat is, in the education community. Not everyone in the public might not know what an education retreat is, but Dr. Menzel, Dr. Ogle, you've worked around this for many years.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on this particular agenda?
I, as a guest, have no expectation of any action or any kind of even, input from you or any of the four of your colleagues. I'm presenting a concept that has been developed from years of experience from working with your colleagues across the state, and I'm presenting that to you as a tool to learn from and maybe prompt some discussion. And anything beyond that, I for one have no expectation, and I don't believe your administration does.
Can I make this maybe more clear? We will not have a vote on this document. So can we discuss it? This will not be on a board agenda for a vote. I think the work that needs to be done here is more important than the kind of formality of taking this to a vote.
And I'd go a little bit further. So in scheduling a retreat, the intent and respectfully, the intent is to allow the board to have a conversation about how we're going to work together. This is a part of a conversation about how we're going to work together. And I don't believe that the open meeting law required us to say the retreat is about how the board is going to work together. Because that's generally what board retreats are. And there's no perceived action except for we're going to talk about how we're going to work together. So on the front end of the retreat, you had conversations about roles and responsibilities, which is a common and standard practice. On the back end, it's about shared agreements and how we're going to communicate. What Dr. Ogle did is to take things that have been done by other districts around the state and the valley, and then crosswalk that with our policy. So it kind of made it customized for Scottsdale Unified School District. So that highlights, here's where what I've been doing with a lot of other schools kind of aligns with policies you already have. So this is a starting point for having a conversation about how we, as a leadership team, 5 governing board members and the superintendent, will work together to advance our agenda for kids. And so to that end, it was never intended that this would be a part of an action item tonight. I didn't know that it would ever be considered as an action item. My interest is in, does this resonate? You know, it's aligned with our policy based on what's shown here, but if there was something that you read and said, I'm not sure that that really makes sense in our context, that would be helpful to know. Or maybe we can tighten up something because have established a pattern of practice or behavior that we've done it, but it really doesn't align with what our policy says. Well, maybe it's an opportunity to talk about, okay, how could we do that better? Because ultimately, I think we just want to be better so that we can produce better outcomes for our kids. So that was the intent behind this. Nothing more, nothing less. And so I appreciate the cautionary note, because I also don't want to violate Arizona statute.
I want to be served again.
Yep, I appreciate that.
Right. That's awful.
So, but that was the intent, and it's just the second part of a normal retreat to get to that shared understanding of how we're going to do our work together.
So given that information, does anyone have any concerns about having a discussion around, I see these as kind of expectations as your role on the board and how they've mapped to policy, but also just, the discussion part is, and it's like, Karen, you have a lot of notes, so let's discuss them, and that is kind of how you see it, right? How you see these roles playing out in this dynamic. So we do have 10 months together. Like it or not, we're together, we're a team, and we've got 21,000 plus kids counting on us. I'll open it up with that.
Yeah.
If that's...
All right, continuing. Then thank you, Karen, for that. The board superintendent will annually set goals using the strategic plan as your format and a framework. And the board will address its own performance with yearly self-evaluations. That's good practice. I don't know if it's occurring or not, but it is good practice. Next one, only the board as a whole has authority. Board members don't have individual authority. Decisions can only be made in an open meeting by a majority vote. Board president and superintendent will communicate positions of the board on controversial issues, and those are the policies that specifically reference the board giving authority to the board president and the superintendent to be the spokesperson. And in a district of this importance in the state, we all know that, when the news team is out in the parking lot, that it's going to be a difficult walk to your car, and we've all been there in different environments in our career. And it really, it takes a level of sophistication to be able to manage that without embarrassing yourself and without being rude to people, but being able to honor your policy commitments to yourself, and being a good ambassador of the district, and frankly, being a good teammate to your 5 colleagues, your superintendent and 4 board colleagues, because the minute one person goes off and jumps into that arena in the media, then all of a sudden you've created a barrier between the other 4 board members and the superintendent, and it's just the lay of the land.
If I may interject here, I will give kudos to Board President Dr. Hart-Wells right now on that, because she has directly included me in on press questions, saying when I was the board president, so I'm trying to be very conscientious about that.
That's great practice.
Now moving forward, because I was like, oh yeah, you're right, thank you, and
that's great.
Yeah, thank you.
That's great. Journalists are trained to try to draw individuals out in organizations like this, not just whether it's a city council or the county commissioners or school boards or wherever, they are specifically trained on how to do things like that. And in some of the trainings that I've been purview to, they're also trained to leave the microphone on after they've completed the interview. That's a common trick of the trade, so to speak. You know, thank you very much, Dr. Menzel, for talking with us today. I look forward to talking to you again in the future. And as I walk away, I leave the microphone on, and you hear people misstep that way. And so it's just, it's part of the world right now, but okay. Next one, the board will emphasize planning, policy making, public relations rather than becoming involved in the management of the schools with a policy reference. And the last one on this page, encouraging debate and differing points of view. We as a board engage with civility, care, and respect to avoid escalating or developing negative impressions or incidents. We agree to avoid words and actions that create negative impressions on an individual, the board, or the district. Individuals may disagree with the board action, but support the decision of the board as a whole. That's a tough one, and it's tough for all boards. So I'm going to stop here and entertain questions or thoughts.
I'll just react to the DCA, you pulled the ethics policy and kind of pulled that concept of an ambassador versus an official spokesperson, and I think that's an appropriate and healthy distinction with the difference. I like that. I would say I would add a adjective of goodwill, ambassador in front of that.
There you go. That's probably good.
Well, and like a superintendent, board members can never not be a board member. Even though you have other lives and do other things, you as an elected official are always recognizable in the public, and so directly or indirectly are an ambassador.
You can't not be. You just can't not be once the vote occurs. Once you're elected, you're on duty. Other thoughts? Scottsdale Unified is a wonderful and unique place, and you should be so proud of your service and the accomplishments of this district. And the upside potential that you have is amazing. And culture starts here. It starts at the board table. And what happens, like I said, what happens in the schools oftentimes reflects the kinds of expectation and culture that the five of you create. And when it functions well, when the board superintendent team of 6 fit hand in glove, it's just magic. And the best things can happen for communities and for kids and for schools and for your employees and for the Scottsdale community, whether it's economic development, or competing in the whole West for the elite kind of environment that we all love to experience in our town. And you're in the middle of it. And like Dr. Scott said, you can't not be. That's what you signed up for. So that completes our part of the presentation. We have a few minutes for discussion.
I guess I'd like to, if we can, maybe kind of just go around, and if you have something you'd like to add, maybe that doesn't have to be captured in any of the documents tonight, but this is your opportunity. We're at a retreat, so there's a lot of degrees of freedom, I think, in what we can try to accomplish. And in the last 10 minutes or so, just maybe go around. If you don't think that, that's fine. That's okay. No pressure, but the floor is yours.
Nothing from you?
Anything?
Nope.
Okay.
Looking at that relationship of trust, the how I circled, because I do think that some of our greatest struggles is an impact on employees is when the board wants to determine the how. And I appreciate that that's under the superintendent's column, because I do think that you had mentioned before that it's the leadership from the top, right?
Right.
As board members, when we try to cross over and determine the how for trained professionals, it's super disrespectful to our employees, and they feel it. So I appreciate that that is over there in that column.
And I think there's the superintendent's the final arbitrator of how, right?
Mhm.
It doesn't mean you're not going to have opinions, and so it doesn't mean you can't share them with him. But, you know, his job is to decide the how with the employees that he's hired. So, and your job is to give feedback from the community, and that is important, and that, I'm sure, goes into many decisions that are made by superintendents.
So I'm really proud to be a board member. I'm proud of our staff, our students, and I think we have a wonderful community of parents and taxpayers, and it really is a privilege to serve and to have the community trust me in a way that they'll communicate with me and trust us to lead the ship in the right direction. Thank you.
Now, I've seen a norm in another district uses, and their number one is that we prioritize the time necessary to build trusting partnerships among board members, which we have not done. And I think that that's a big fault of this board, and maybe something we need to add in for future, for the new board coming in.
Sure.
What would you like to see? How would we actionize what that was? And I think it's
Well,
a
I
fair
think
point.
we would have done a retreat in the beginning and gotten to know each other a little bit or something. I mean, gotten to know, yeah, I mean, just a simple, I feel like we've been scrambling the past year. And if we could have done this, like I said, right off the gate, and had been able to have real conversations and get to know each other maybe on a lower level than just walking in the first time into a board meeting.
Start voting.
And start voting. I mean, I think things could have been different. So I would like to see that for the new board in January.
Okay. How about, kind of back that up, how about the next 10 months when we still have a pretty decent amount of the school year left, 2/3 of the school year at least, with a big budget and
Right.
curriculum decisions. So we
I'd like to
still
know
have
where
some
that study
time.
session is with the budget, because I didn't hear if
So
that was
actually-
happening or.
Well, actually, I don't know if I can talk about that or not, but, so Gladys reached out with some requests for dates and didn't hear back. So, what we're doing is looking into, a workshop I took when I first joined the board, a workshop on USFR, which is the, was it financial records, system of financial records, which governs our budget. Did you do that?
Mm-hmm.
You did that, okay.
Yeah, no, I requested the study session, and I did respond. I might have been a little late.
Okay.
Yeah, I responded
Because
too.
I do think it's really important that we sit down and have conversations with people that are actually doing the budget. I have a lot of questions, and I don't want to do them at the podium, you know, or just to.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I was informed that, you know, when we
Yeah.
put the dates out there, if you ask for something, and I realize it's an extra time commitment, but if you're gonna request something, then please be responsive so we can get something on the calendar. That's why we just went with the March 26th to put the special education request, I think, was
Title
your
I.
request, and then, you know,
Preschool,
other
Title I
things,
preschool.
yeah, preschool, Title I, something that also, there's another agenda item that we're gonna wait and talk about at that meeting too, so I appreciate you making yourself available for that, but just try to be responsive so that we can get these things on. But the
Yeah.
intent is to have a study session.
Yeah.
So if you're if you felt like that workshop was, I thought it was a very good workshop in terms of orienting, you know,
Yeah.
school budgeting, which is not intuitive in the state of Arizona. But if you want something more detailed, what would be helpful? We can get something on the agenda, we do have to have a quorum.
So I don't know that we have to have a quorum. So if we post an information session on the budget that's a Q&A, if a quorum doesn't show up, because there'll be no action on it.
Right.
So the way, and Nick, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the way I read the Attorney General's opinion that came out last Friday is if we posted the meeting as an open meeting, could be 1 to 5 board members that show up, but it will be conducted as OML, so the agenda will be clear. The public can sit and listen.
Okay, but we wouldn't have to call the meeting to order as a quorum.
You have to take minutes, but you don't have to have a quorum. So you have an agenda that's posted. The agenda can be, information and discussion on SUSD budget, and that's what it'd be, is Q&A on the budget. That's what I understand the request
Yeah, and
is,
I have
right?
requested information in preparation for that meeting as well.
So I think from that perspective, as long as it's posted, there's an agenda and minutes.
Essentially, you're saying it's not a meeting.
It's a community
You're just
forum.
having people
Study
getting
session.
together.
But
So like a town hall forum where we have it specific.
but it's so
You're
so
avoiding your open meeting law violations by posting it and agendizing.
You're not really wanting to have it be, because it's not a community town hall, it's board members, but if you have less than 3, I think you could still have the meeting, right?
We did the KPI one, and I thought that was really helpful when we all sat. We don't need that
Right.
many people, but we sat
Yes,
around
I
the
know
table,
what you're
and
saying,
I
yeah.
thought that was really helpful to be able to ask those questions. And
So I don't know if we
So do
had,
you think we could go that route if we don't have a quorum? I'm not sure. But for those of us that have, we're in our 4th year, I'm not sure that we might get a quorum. But it's a good content. But what if we don't have a quorum?
Yeah, I
Are we
think,
still going to be
like
able to
Ms.
proceed?
Bacon said, it'd be like a community forum as opposed to a board meeting, right? So you're more doing a notice of that the board members will
Notice
be
of
present.
gathering?
Yeah.
I was going to suggest that.
A notice of gathering.
or when you
But
have
I
to
would
take
also-
one for the team.
but I would
So
also-
when you have to take one for the team.
I would argue that learning together is good, too. So if all board members would commit to coming, I think there is never a time that you aren't going to learn something when you're talking about Arizona school finance. So that's the other option, right? Make it a meeting or not, but.
well, the final budget approval is not till June 30th. So my
Right.
question would be, could we add this to the March 26th
5th?
meeting?
Oh, the 26th.
So
Oh,
that,
yeah.
because we only have like 2 other agenda topics. If you added one more, and we're still be in an environment where we can have the questions, because we can take the U and make it a square. We've done that before in that room at the MDA. So it still can be more conversational. Won't have as many people as the KPI, but have the right people. So if we added it to that agenda,
I'm comfortable adding it to the agenda
Okay.
if everyone's willing to commit that much time. And that's fine. That's fine.
And that
I
meeting
think
starts at 7.
Oh, on March, no, 6.
Yeah,
On March
I won't be able to make it to
26th.
7 because in the RSVP it says 7.
You also can do 2 separate events on the same
That's a
day,
lot.
on the same evening.
yeah, we can. So let's think about how we get this scheduled so we can have the conversation and figure out the structure that works and keeps us in compliance with OML and all the rest. Can I make 2?
You may.
Thank you. So one thing that I just wanted to share, I think it really is important, as we talked about power and influence, and the governing board exercises its power when it is acting as a board sitting at a properly agendized meeting. The influence you exercise in a lot of different ways. So I have said to my staff many times over, a good idea, regardless of where it comes from, is something that we should contemplate. So there are people who say, well, that came from a board member and it was only one board member. Well, if it's a good idea and it makes sense and we should be doing it, I don't need to put it on an agenda to say that's just a common sense solution. It could have come from a parent in the grocery store. It could have come from Tim. It could have come, so there's a common sense judgment about some of those things. When it comes to big picture policy, changing how we do things as a system, then being very disciplined about putting that on an agenda and thinking about what are the both intended and unintended consequences, a separate conversation. But that is an area of gray in terms of, well, how many are those suggestions expectations for delivery? So that's, I think, where there becomes the dynamic tension between some staff members and board members, because is a board member suggestion an expectation, or is it just an idea for your consideration? And so that's part of what I think my team is wrestling with. And I was hoping that tonight's conversation helps us get clarity around differentiating between the two, because I actually think all 5 of you hear from different people. You hear from different, because I hear from different people. And it's the aggregation of those different points of view that help us make better decisions for the whole. So I think that's one thing that I just wanted to surface. The other is, and I shared this with Dr. Hartwells, I've been reading a book called 4 Disciplines of Execution for Education. And it's a riff off of 4 Disciplines of Execution that was done for private sector. And maybe that would be a good thing for the board to read, but I just want to focus. There are 4 disciplines. The first one is focus on the wildly important goals. You can't have more than 3. And when I think about the work that we do, even with our KPIs, we have more than 3. We have so much on everybody's plate that it becomes overwhelming. So as we wrap up this year and begin to think about next year, one of our opportunities is to say, okay, what are the biggest 3 priorities for our district that will move the needle for our kids? And different people have different ideas, but if we can begin thinking about that and make that a relentless area of focus, and I'll give you 2 examples. Attendance has been a top area as a KPI. But because people are looking at it every week and they're asking the questions and our building principals are working on it, the needle has moved from where it was last year. If you don't pay attention to the important data, sometimes you get lucky and the data turns out good, but other times you don't. So that's one area. The other is related to enrollment, because that drives our economic engine. And this year, unlike in past years, we've been thinking about the process for open enrollment at this time of year and how quickly we move people from waitlist into enrolled status. And we get updates every week now on that. So the intentionality around it shifts the level of focus. But from a governing board perspective, when the board sets the big 3 wildly important goals for the district, then that can trickle down to departments, into buildings, into classrooms, into kid level wildly important goals. So when I think about how we might work together as a team for the next 10 months, we have the core work that we have to do. It's going to always be there. We're going to approve budgets, do all those kinds of things. But if we can also figure out, because we're going to be setting the goals for the next year, this board will set the goals for the next year, framing that, building on what we already have. It's good work in the strategic plan. The commitments are good work. The KPIs are good. But let's take it to the next level so that we can have maximum impact. Is sort of my thinking about the opportunity we have as a governing leadership team.
Well, and growth is an iterative process, right? So we're learning
Yes.
and learning from that learning.
Right.
So growth. Well, if there aren't any more comments or suggestions, I would like to thank our facilitators, Julie and Tim, for being with us this evening. I also would like to thank each one of you for taking your time out of your family time in the evening to be here. And last but absolutely not least, Ms. Wagner, for your efforts in putting this all together. It was no small feat, so thank you, Gladys.
Thank you.
Do I have to officially close?
You should adjourn, yes.
All right, we are officially PM. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you
for having us.
Thanks.